Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Death of Death, where we proclaim Christ's victory over sin, death, and everything else. It's great to be back with you. Although you didn't notice any change in the flow of the episodes here, I finished the last 2 or 3 episodes all at once, got married, and went on a short honeymoon. So for me, it's like being back in the saddle after a long time off. By the way, I apologize in advance if there's any background noise. I have people working from home in my house where I'm recording this, so it's just part of life now. I haven't ceased working on the show, except for 2 days of my 3-day honeymoon. There's some stuff coming up soon that I've been hard at work on, so I hope that you guys like it. I hope it's worth the time I've been putting in on it. I hate talking about COVID-19 now, and I'm sure a lot of you do too. The only thing I can compare it to, and it doesn't mean it comes anywhere close to it, but the election in 2016, October, November of 2016, the election was all anyone could think, talk, or write about. It was one of the worst periods of my life. As a third-party voter, I was never on the same page with anyone, and I was at constant odds with everyone I talked to because that's all anyone wanted to talk about. Flash forward to now, and this virus is just like the election. It's all anyone can talk, think, or write about, and I'm at constant odds with the people who talk about it. So this episode isn't supposed to be about COVID-19 specifically, but I had to preface this episode by saying, if you're sick of hearing about it, you should know that I'm sick of talking about it. There's literally nothing else going on. I had to touch on this topic in some ways because it's the most ubiquitous thing I've ever experienced in my lifetime. I can't just not talk about it. I'm just hoping to address it in a more entertaining way that doesn't make you want to idle in the garage for a while with the doors closed. I've not really addressed it the last few episodes, so this hopefully you're not sick of hearing me talk about it. I was going to get into the numbers to show why COVID-19 is not the threat that the media makes it out to be, but the numbers change every day, and I want to do something a little more timeless here, and I don't want people to, a month from now to say that the numbers I said are wrong, so let's just avoid all that. Let's just say that at best, the death rate is horribly inflated, and it's probably 10 times less deadly than it looks. And honestly, it doesn't look all that deadly from the numbers that I'm seeing. We can only calculate a death rate by deaths of known cases, and everyone acknowledges that we don't have all the cases diagnosed, so we can't possibly have an accurate death rate. This may turn out to be the end of humanity as we know it, in the terms of handshakes may be a thing of the past, but once again, this was a failure to predict the end of days. And it got me thinking about the many ways the world at large believes we're going to meet our demise and how none of them ever pan out. So imagine, if you will, I came up with a little scenario for you to imagine. A saloon where all the apocalyptic predictors hang out. You walk in and each group occupies its own space in the bar. Picture some standing at the bar, some might be shooting dice in a big circle, one or two might be leaning back on the hind legs of their chair, a cigarette dangles from the corner of their mouth. Whatever you want to picture. The first group you notice is pretty loud, and they seem to be in disagreement with each other about a lot of things, but they all hold the same book. That's when you realize who you're standing before. We wouldn't get far in this conversation without including all of the misguided folks who have misinterpreted the Bible over the centuries, specifically our ill-informed brothers and sisters, the dispensationalists. If you don't know what dispensationalism means, it's too big a topic for here and now, but suffice it to say, things like the rapture, the coming of one specific antichrist, a one-world currency, all of those things come more or less from dispensationalism. This will by no means be an exhaustive talk on this topic, but I will link to some books in the show notes that will definitely get you where you want to go if you're interested in this. To put your minds at ease in a brief fashion, dispensationalists are in general wrong about the end of the world. This comes mostly from a misinterpretation of the book of Revelation, although that's just the finish line of a lot of regrettable interpretive decisions throughout the whole Bible. To put it simply, Revelation is not about the end of the world. Revelation is about the destruction of Jerusalem, which took place in 70 AD, way back in the 1st century. So there's no one specific antichrist rising to political power, ushering in the apocalypse, because most people in politics are antichrists. And if you think this is more political talk, this is just factual. John, in his epistle, defines an antichrist as anyone who denies that Jesus is the Christ, meaning Christ deniers are all antichrists. Anyone who denies Jesus is God. That's everyone but Christians, really. John doesn't refer to the Antichrist in the book of Revelation, but the beast, which is definitely Nero for many reasons. The books to which I'm linking can show you. The most important thing to know is that Revelation was written to real people in the 1st century. Whatever the tribulation is, John considered himself a part of it, and he repeatedly relays Jesus' message to the churches that he's coming soon. Multiple times, he words it that way. And just remember, it had to have meant something to the people who received it. So if Revelation is about the end of the world, let's just say it's tomorrow, that means the people that receive that letter, it wouldn't have application to anyone in the whole history of the church for 2,000 years, and that just doesn't make any sense. Over the last 150 years or so since dispensationalism was concocted, they have failed to predict the end of the world over and over and over and over again. Credit cards were once thought to be the mark of the beast. I remember people saying Obama was the Antichrist. It fails over and over and over again, and they keep on guessing. Stepping outside of biblical Christianity, which arguably I always have been, you have a great many cults. The Seventh-day Adventists were actually founded on the Great Disappointment. Do you know what that is? The Great Disappointment is a song by the band AFI on their 2002 album Sing the Sorrow. That record changed my life, and this song is possibly the best one on the record. Song happens to be named The Great Disappointment, but that's not the historical event I'm referring to. But I have to say, if I had to choose between the historical event and the AFI song, I'm choosing the AFI song every time, because believe it or not, the historical event is not really all that fun or catchy. It doesn't hold a lot of the good times that the song does. The Great Disappointment was when Baptist preacher, another moment I'm ashamed to be a Baptist, but I am, William Miller misinterpreted Daniel 8 and predicted the return of Christ on October 22nd, 1844. And guess who didn't show? William Miller referred to this event as the Advent, which is how they came to be known as the Seventh-day Adventists. It kind of blows me away that this is what the entire religion is based on, a failed prediction of the return of Jesus, but I'm not trying to make fun of people. If you go to the Wikipedia page for The Great Disappointment, you'll see some very confusing but also amusing charts and graphs trying to explain the predictions made by William Miller, and I'm tempted to rest my case right there. I've learned in general that if your Bible interpretation requires a graph, you're doing it wrong. Another end-of-the-world prediction riddled with bad Bible comes to mind is the Branch Davidians, headed by David Koresh in Waco, Texas. That one actually kind of came true because, like, their world was definitely ended when law enforcement came in and murdered them all. But I can't say it was really accurate outside of that context. Outside of the dispensationalists, it's all cults. It really seems like there's no bottom to the hole filled with cults misusing revelation to predict the end of the world. I think dispensationalism has gone a long way to giving these cults credibility in the eyes of some because it so closely resembles what a huge part of U.S. Christians believe. I'm going to have a quick aside here as we close out the portion of Bible prophecy, without getting into a long discussion on eschatology, which is the study of last things. I'll say this. The Bible says that Jesus will be at the right hand of the Father until all of his enemies are made a footstool for him. So that's what I believe. Once you wade your way through people who've misinterpreted the Bible, we're back in the saloon now, you come to a group that's just as loud, but they're not as confident. They are the definition of frazzled. They pull their hair out. They pace around in circles. You don't blame them for acting this way once you find out that they think they're all about to die. We stand before the environmentalists. This group is different than the last in more ways than one, where the last group was confident and maybe even happy about the end of the world. This group is frantic. The last group was eager to invite you into their gathering, but this group is very standoffish with you, not inviting you in, but rather criticizing you up and down and telling you to wake up. They must see a lot of ceiling with their noses so fixed in the air. Climate change is an interesting phenomenon, starting first and foremost with the name. It wasn't always referred to as climate change. Did you know that? My listeners, who are under 20 years of age, if I have any, probably don't remember this, but I remember a time when it was referred to as global warming. The problem was that the global temperature dropped a few degrees and they realized that they had to rebrand. Here's why that was a smart rebrand. Nobody can deny that the climate changes. It changes every day. If the global temperature drops down a few ticks, you can call out global warming, but you can't call out climate change. It's like the cult in Parks and Recreation who call themselves the reasonableists, because if you tried to argue with them, you would look unreasonable. So here's one of many problems with climate change. How do we know what the optimal temperature for Earth is? How do you know that a significantly higher temperature wouldn't be better? Some animals would go extinct, sure, but animals went extinct long before the automobile was invented. I don't see any velociraptors around. The other problem is we don't have definitive proof that humans are the cause of the climate change. There was an event known as the medieval warm period, which lasted from approximately 950 to 1250. Again, that's long before the technology that's so often blamed for the temperature of the Earth. Possible causes of this event, which are listed, include increased solar activity, decreased volcanic activity, and changes to ocean circulation. And that's weird, because I didn't find anything about cow flatulence or cars or anything like that. It seems nobody entertains humans as the cause of this warming period, but for some reason, now we're to blame. Also interesting to note that the period of time right after the medieval warm period is known as the Little Ice Age, which lasts from about the 13th to 19th centuries. That timeline is disputed, but it's generally that. Nature seems to have caused a period where the Earth got a little warmer than usual and immediately course-corrected with a little ice age. So why are we so often blamed for the current change in climate? Ultimately, we have no idea if humans are causing it, but politicians and climate change activists are quick to say we are, and there's a multitude of reasons why they have a vested interest in it, but that's, opening a whole other can of worms. There's a link in the show notes to a page with a myriad of false predictions about climate change. They've been falsely predicting the end of the world since the 1970s at least, and they continue to do it today. Now, I am not saying that people aren't responsible for the type of pollution that turns polar bears brown, or that it's justified. We are image bearers of God and called to steward the earth, so that's something we should take very seriously. That doesn't mean we're bringing on the end of the world or the end of our species when we don't use recyclable bags. That's all I'm saying. That's how they talk, though. I feel bad for Greta Thunberg, if I can be candid. She is a child with autism and severe mental illness who's being abused by the adults in her life. Do you understand that? Do you disagree with my statement? She developed depression and an eating disorder when she was 8 years old because she found out about climate change and couldn't understand why no one was doing anything about it. Some idiot told this child that the world was going to end, and understandably, that messed her up pretty bad. Do you remember the first speech that made her so famous? She accused politicians of stealing her childhood. She and lots of other environmentalists are going to waste their lives in fear. Nothing is going to come of these fears, and they will have wasted their lives. Why is nobody else outraged by that? That little girl who doesn't know any better will spend her whole life in fear of that impending doom, but won't spend her life in fear of this impending doom. Impending Doom, Nailed Dead Risen, 2007, fantastic record. I haven't listened to that in so long. I promise not to do that for the rest of the episode, but I can't promise that won't be a recurring joke on the show. If you talk to a serious environmentalist long enough, you'll find that people are the ultimate problem. We are actually the disease on an otherwise fine planet. They essentially believe we're a virus that needs to be eradicated for the good of the planet. It's a completely pagan worldview. If in the saloon you started slowly backing away from these people, no one would blame you, but by mistake you bumped into some of their close associates. The serious environmentalist has a pagan worldview of planet worship, where the earth is the undefiled, perfect being, and we humans, a recent addition, are nothing more than parasites destroying her. That's why the most serious environmentalist fundamentally believes that humans need to die. You see this play out in a lot of leftist positions. In fact, the abortion, or more properly stated, the murder of at least 600,000 babies a year, that's certainly a sacred right held by the left, challenged only by evil white male capitalists. The death with dignity controversy, which used to be prevalent in the news but hasn't been a topic for a while, stated that terminally ill people should have the right to prescribed poisons that could end their life. While they still have the soundness of mind to make that decision for themselves, they'll drink a cup of poison and go to sleep. This conflicts with the fundamental fact of life belonging to God to be administered and taken away whenever he sees fit and not when we get tired of living. It seems a lot of leftists don't have any children, which is why I'm optimistic that this ideology will die out soon, but it does seem to go along with the overwhelming consensus of leftist propaganda that humans are disposable and should be downsized. Those who refer to it as a culture of death are correct in that statement. Nothing in their ideology promotes life. Even the increasing socialist communist side of the left condemns work and fruitfulness and prosperity, leaving humans to wallow in their current position, useless, until they're lucky enough to do us all a favor and die. In the meantime, we'll avoid having children. If a mistake is made, we'll kill them in the womb, and we'll sacrifice the last few months of our life as soon as we're diagnosed with an illness. We're talking about overpopulation alarmism, if you haven't figured it out yet. I'm linking to a Forbes article in the show notes that gives a brief history of it and why it's such a problem for human rights and flourishing, and some of the false predictions made. The concerns about overpopulation have been around for a couple centuries. The depletion of resources is always cited as the problem, but the alarm tends to die down once innovations are made that make the idea more untenable. Like when farms became more mechanized and started producing more food in shorter periods of time with less work, suddenly overpopulation isn't as much a concern. I've heard it said before that if we took every living person on the planet and stood them next to each other, we'd all fit within LA County. So I Googled it, and it turns out that that's true. One facet of the overpopulation concern, space, is debunked. So some areas may have a more dense population, but that doesn't mean that the entire world will be that way. I venture to guess it would take us centuries to populate the U.S. to its full potential, and only if we planned very poorly. I'm omitting all of the hypothetical ways we could inhabit more unused space for that very reason. It's hypothetical. However, the concerns of overpopulation don't even rise to the level of hypothetical. They're just unrealistic. With more people comes more innovation, meaning more alternative food sources, more means of producing food, expansion of existing food production, and more people to work that food production. Maybe I'm ignorant to not be concerned about this, but it seems to me that history shows over and over that these concerns only exist until the next innovation comes along. After you bumped into the overpopulation nuts who are looking to kill anyone for any reason, you apologized profusely and got out of it alive. Now, you approach a table in the saloon that used to be populated solely by sci-fi nerds, but it seems now everyone wants a seat. These are the pandemic hysterics. It used to be just fictional stories like Outbreak and Contagion, a world where Mother Nature finally fights back against us humans and tries to eradicate us just like the leftists want. It gets out of control and mayhem ensues. There are historical examples of diseases killing large portions of the population, but none of them came anywhere close to the end of humanity. Just in my lifetime alone, we've had the SARS panic, West Nile virus, bird flu, swine flu, Ebola. I'm probably missing some. The point is, every few years a virus comes along and freaks everybody out. Pandemic hysteria hypes up a little each time. I remember West Nile virus and the bird flu being mild concerns in the backs of people's heads, and then swine flu led to people making more liberal use of hand sanitizer and disinfectant spray, and Ebola was an all-out fear-mongering panic on the news 24/7, even though only like 2 people ever got it. It makes sense that the next step in the evolution was to try some kind of practical lockdown and experiment with some safety precautions. I think we can all agree now that it's gotten out of hand. I prefer not to talk about COVID-19 any more than that because I want to be the podcast you come to escape the nonsense that holds us all so captive. But needless to say, the world is not ending by the hands of this virus, nor will any other virus come along and do so. In conclusion, people have always been talking about and wondering about the end of the world. It's been the subject of fiction and fantasy and the tangible fear of some who have no biblical worldview. Many different predictions have been made about how we as a species come to an end, and they've all been proven false, mostly because they presuppose that we will come to an end. False interpretations of the Bible, false projections of the effect of climate change, invalid concerns for the overpopulation of the planet, and false predictions of the impact of viruses and pandemics have all held people firmly in the grip of panic. Some of these fears are as old as recorded history. But God decides what happens to his creation. Life is his to give and take, and his plans are more concrete than an existential accident he never saw coming. I presented 4 ways the world is not ending. I have tried to avoid talk of COVID-19 to try to give you a break from that, but hopefully this episode was the right kind of break from it. I'm glad to have the types of listeners that I have because you're as rational as you are optimistic. Some of the most dedicated listeners have chosen to partner with me by joining the Elect on Patreon for only $4 a month. If that's something you want to do, go over to patreon.com/deathofdeath and sign up today. That's going to do it for today. That was a pretty long episode by our standards. I hope you enjoyed this. Make sure to follow Death of Death on Twitter and Instagram at Death of Death Pod, and sign up for that email list if you haven't yet. You can sign up on the homepage of deathofdeath.net. I've been your host, Nick, here to tell you that the world is not ending, and if you're as committed to proclaiming Christ's victory as I am, I'll be here to do it with you all again next week. Goodbye for now.